here today. And I now welcome representatives from the Maritime Union of Australia. And for the Hansard record, could you please give your names and the capacity in which you appear today?
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name's Ian Bray, and I currently, or recently, moved over to the National Coordinator position for the ITF. I was previously the Assistant National Secretary of the Maritime Union of Australia.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, my name is Paul McAleer, and I'm currently employed as the ITF Dockers Asia Pacific Lead Campaigner and Organiser. And a month ago, I completed 12 years as Maritime Union of Australia Sydney Branch Secretary.
Thank you. I invite you to make a brief opening statement before the committee asks questions. Do either of you wish to make an opening statement?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Where do I start in terms of the continuity of the previous submission that was sent before the committee? On that occasion, the ITF and the Maritime Union was represented by Mr Dean Summers, who has since gone into retirement, and by extension now we wish to elaborate further on that submission. It's no surprise to anybody in the room that we're all probably surprised we're being reverted back to another hearing, considering this Act was probably due to or destined to enter into legislation probably last week. So it's quite surprising. But having said that and having a look at it and having a further opportunity to raise our concerns, I note that not a lot has changed in the submission that Mr Summers outlined and presented to this committee or other committees in terms of maritime security, as I recall it, somewhere around about last September. We, having given this opportunity, we wanted to have a look at some of the things that might add value to previous submissions and evidence on hand. And so we looked at it from that angle, and we wish to present some relatively new findings here, or probably more correctly consolidated findings here that we wish to present and inform the committee of in terms of their deliberations. I wish to talk to two specific matters in relation to the Transport Security Serious Crimes Bill, and one goes to shipping itself and the Coastal Trading Act, and obviously the foreign ships, foreign flag ships and foreign seafarers that touch our coastline on a daily basis in their thousands, but also to the requirements for those ships to enter into Australian ports as per the Coastal Trading Act and not necessarily the Transport Security Act. For a ship to enter into Australia, and more specifically to engage in coastal trade, that is, trade from one port to another port, they must acquire a temporary licence. This licence must be approved, and it must be displayed in a prominent place at all times whilst the ship is in Australia. So we wanted to have a look at that because with a security lens rather than a regulatory lens. And what we found is a number of ships, and I've highlighted some in the submission, the updated submission that we presented, have not been doing this. And in actual fact, I've listed in the submission 10 examples of where foreign flag ships are not even bothering to apply for the temporary licence. Now, we found this by accident because part of our remit as the ITF is to ensure that foreign flag ships with foreign crews trading on the Australian coast in the domestic space, and that is, carrying Australian cargo from one port to another, have an entitlement under Australian law, a separate law again, the Fair Work Act, that they are entitled to payments to the award, the Seagoing Industry Award, Part B, for the third and ongoing voyages. So they're entitled to Australian wages as per the award from the third voyage onwards. So we as an inspectorate go and we make sure those entitlements are being paid.
I'm sorry to interrupt, when you say the third voyage, do you mean they've entered the Australian waters 3 times?
Yes, or not necessarily entered into Australian waters 3 times, but if they enter into Brisbane and go to Sydney, that's 1. Sydney to Melbourne is 2, and then Melbourne to Adelaide would be the third voyage. So at that particular time, the foreign seafarers would be entitled to Part B of the award as a payment.
From Brisbane or from
Yes,
Adelaide?
it goes back to Brisbane once they do that third and on-shoeing voyages.
Thank you.
No. But if the ship comes back again, that's the third voyage. So, it's... you pick it up at some point in swings and roundabouts if you determine, the pattern of a ship and how it trades. So, but by and large, as an inspectorate, we look at these things to make sure that those foreign seafarers are being afforded their entitlements as per law. And when we find that there is not a payment, we revert and inform the Fair Work Ombudsman of such breach. Now, I guess we stumbled on this by accident when it was in its infancy, because what the Fair Work Ombudsman was coming back to us with was, well, they're not entitled to the wages because there's no temporary licence. So we were looking at it saying, well, the ship's here. We were looking at it and saying it's completed its third and on-shoeing voyages, and the Fair Work Ombudsman was saying they're not entitled because the ship's... What are they saying? Was it the ship's here illegally, or they can't act because it hasn't got a temporary permit?
So Mr. Bray, so you've uncovered, the ITF inspectors have uncovered crews working Australia's domestic coastal trade that haven't got a temporary licence.
That's correct, Senator.
The ship hasn't got it.
That's correct,
So
Senator.
you've gone on to say, are you getting paid after the third trip the Aussie wages? And then they say, you go to the Fair Work Ombudsman, the Fair Work Ombudsman said, we can't prosecute because they haven't got a licence.
That's correct.
What the bloody hell good is it to have a licence? Is no one policing this? Sorry, I'll let you go on.
Yeah, well...
Nothing surprises me anymore in this field, but let's go. Sorry.
Again, we just wanted to highlight here that that's the purpose of where we want to go to today in terms of the evidence we want to present. Because you're quite right, in the last 24 hours, you've got to understand our inspectorate is a team of 4, including myself. I'm here today as part of the inspectorate. So that leaves 3 out there doing what they do in terms of, making sure that ship owners are complying with the terms and conditions of employment when they're on the coast here. In the last 24 hours, 2 of my inspectors have gone up 2 different ships in 2 different ports and ascertained breaches to the Coastal Trading Act because the vessels don't have temporary licences.
Can you name those vessels for us?
No, I can't at this point. I can take that on notice and get it to you
and do you know where they are?
5 o'clock today.
Yeah, that'd be great, Mr. Bray. Do you know where they are?
One is in Brisbane, one was in Sydney.
Okay.
So again, for us, and that was in the last 24 hours, we've uncovered these ships. We, as an inspectorate, it's not our remit to go out and enforce compliance of the Coastal Trading Act or the temporary licence regime. But it appears on an ever-increasing basis that these ships are appearing with no temporary licences, and I want to try to switch this back to the intent on why we're bringing this forward to this committee, because the department doesn't even know they're here. Now, I get it that Border Force or somebody else might have, and they're looking through their scope. But in terms of what other businesses here, what cargoes the ship is carrying, where it's trading them to, etc., The Department of Infrastructure and Regional Development wouldn't know under the Coastal Trading Act, and I believe it's their remit, the Coastal Trading Act.
Sorry, who issues the TPVs?
The department.
The department?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And how does that happen? Does a ship say, hey, or does the client says, I'm going to use a foreign ship or a flag of convenience ship? Do you know how that all works? We'll ask the department how it works because you've got me intrigued.
Well, essentially, I'm led to believe, and, I can't confirm otherwise, I'm led to believe it's either the charterer that wants the cargo carried or the ship owner themselves that can apply for the temporary licence.
We'll follow that up. Yep.
Just to clarify too, of course, these ships that are foreign ships have got foreign crew operating on our coast,
Yes.
moving in and out of foreign ports.
Yes.
That haven't been checked.
That's
that
correct.
haven't been approved to do that.
No.
Sounds criminal to me.
So this is the point. We don't understand. We've got all of these processes across. Well, they're interdepartmental, and I'm not sure where the remit of one department or the duty of one department ends and the responsibility of another department.
So these people are not having those authorities means they are breaking the law, aren't they?
As I understand it, yes, they would be. Okay. They're committing offence to the Coastal Trading Act.
And interfering with our borders.
Yes.
Breaching fundamental border protection arrangements that we have set in this country.
Yes. And I just want to add to that, the samples that we have found, we believe, are just a microcosm of, a greater problem because as we identify in our submission, and I believe I've undervalued the amount of visits international ships make to this country through the various ports. But we estimate 20,000 ships a year.
And how many crew would that be then in those foreign ships that are doing coastal work?
Again, in my submissions that I've put to the committee today, I've estimated that as between 200,000 and 300,000, but it could be as high as 400,000 international seafarers.
So how many, just comparing so I can get sort of apples with apples, or maybe prickly pear with apples, how many Australian vessels do domestic coastal shipping routes every year?
About 11, 12.
And how many Australian crew are used?
You double that, so about 24 maximum.
24 per ship.
24, yeah, it's because it's a two berth ratio. So there's two seafarers to every berth. So essentially, if there's a crew of 21 to 24 on board, you'd double that, and that would be the overall complement for the manning. But essentially, there's only ever 21 to 24 ships crew on an Australian ship.
So you want to do the maths for me quickly? What's the maximum?
About 250 in terms in coastal trade, and that excludes the offshore oil and gas, etc., etc.
Okay, so we've identified that there's ships coming into our ports in the last 24 hours, you said? Last 2 days?
Yes.
So there's 2 ships that are doing coastal work without temporary voyage permits?
Correct.
Okay, so we'll follow that up.
Sorry, I'll correct that. One of those ships, after further investigation, it was found it did have the temporary licence. However, it wasn't displayed in a prominent place, which is an offence under the Coastal Trading Act also.
Okay, so we've definitely found one. Are there any other examples?
I've itemised 10 in my submission, and I did so not because there is any more or less relevance to these offences that I've identified, but I did so for the purpose of proving or providing information that this has been going on since 2015, and as I bring on evidence today, 2 ships today. So this has been going on for a number of years in terms of breaches to the Coastal Trading Act by not declaring or applying for temporary licences to trade on the coast.
So Australian seafarers are required to have, abide by, as we know, the ASIC MSIC system, or the MSIC cards of their seafarers, whilst they're working on Australian vessels. So they're keeping their MSIC, but foreign crew on these flag of convenience vessels don't?
No.
What was that? You're saying 300,000, potentially 400,000 crew. They don't have the same standards.
Correct.
So while we're going in this part, can I just, because I'm mindful of the time and I don't want to lose you guys. If I my way, you'd be here all afternoon, the departments would be here all day tomorrow. But let's go back to, and there was conversation in the Senate that I was certainly making last week, where my concern is the stricter background checking in terms of what they want to do now in this bill with Australian workers. And it's not just seafarers, it's our wharfies, it's stevedores and truckies that come on and anyone else. But the government's defence was, and I have a concern here, what background checks are we conducting on the foreign seafarers? And they'll answer that. But what I get to is they make it sound like it's all tickety-boo because when the seafarers get off, they can't go anywhere, they're escorted by someone with an MSIC. So you guys have lived and breathed this. What actually happens when the seafarers get off? Walk us through the normal procedure. Is there a red carpet waiting for our foreign seafarers and then they're all put into a stretched limo? Do they go through any security checks? Is there baggage checks, x-rays, like we have at the airport? Help us out, gents.
My understanding was they would be required to clear customs, as every arrival in Australia is.
And that's done on the ship?
Yeah, but I'm not sure whether it's done physically.
I'm not sure that happens at all.
Okay.
I mean, I worked on the wharves for a number of years, between 1999 and 2007, and have been a maritime official since then till now. And my understanding is seafarers leave their vessel if they've got an opportunity to. These are some of the most exploited workers on earth, mind you, with very little access to rights whatsoever. And during COVID had little ability to even come off the vessels. But ordinarily, they come off the vessel, they get picked up by a wharfie bus driver, escorted to the gate, they go through the security guard, and then they're at their own leisure, basically.
Okay, so because I boarded one of the ships with the ITF inspector with Keith in Freo last year when the COVID was blaring up, and they were getting treated like dirt, these poor buggers, stuck on the ship for 14 months and this sort of nonsense. But I didn't go through any security. I mean, I was at the gate and I signed my name and I had my mask on. So this is what allows me, when we get off the aeroplane, we go through security check, bars, and when we get on and all that sort of stuff. So I want to make it very clear so the bureaucrats don't try and sideswipe me with it's all tickety-boo. There are I didn't go through any X-ray machines and no one checked me backpack or anything.
There's no X-ray machines, there's no metal detectors, there's no, bag checks. These seafarers often just have a backpack and they're not checked.
And when the bus takes them out, does the bus take them to the local Stella Maris or Flying Angel?
They're often picked up by a welfare society for seafarers. There's a number of them, and then taken into the city or somewhere where they can ring their families up, basically. But they're not in port for a long time. They may be alongside for a period of 24 hours, and they might only have access to the community for a few hours. So they will leave the stevedoring facilities and get picked up by a minibus, often by one of the welfare societies or a cab, and then they're free to roam the communities in which they're alongside in port.
Okay, and I do understand and I appreciate how exploited these poor devils are. So that would be the case, Mr. McAleer, when they come back too, is that the bus just drives through the boom gate?
That's it.
And see, okay, all right. Sorry, I keep interrupting.
Sign their names and that's it.
All right.
No significant checks whatsoever. No real checks whatsoever.
And that may or not be from a vessel that the department doesn't even know is here because it hasn't got a temporary licence. Border Force might know it's here for its purposes.
Sorry, Mr. Rose, say that again.
So if they haven't, the department mightn't even know that ship's here. Because if they haven't applied for the temporary licence, how could the department know it's here?
Well, that's a good question.
Just of interest, because being I've certainly been working down the wharves. My previous roles often on the wharf, but what's the tonnage of those ships that are actually pulling up that haven't got these temporary licences?
Oh, that would range.
Tens of thousands.
Yeah, you're
So
talking
tens of thousands of tonnes
Yeah.
potentially of a ship coming in that has not been approved by Border Force or any authority.
Well, Border Force
thousands.
must clear it at some point, but they would be looking at my understanding would be and you'd have to ask them for a better
We'll ask
determination,
them
but
that question.
clearance of the crew in terms of process, but they wouldn't know whether the ship's legally entitled to be here because it's not Border Force's remit to ascertain whether the ship's got a valid temporary licence or not.
Yep.
So
Mr Bray, you might want to consider finishing your opening statement because we do have also Senator Rice, Senator Antic, Senator Rennick online, in addition to Senator Sheldon and Senator Stirl. Thank you.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, the second point that I wanted to go to was the fact our concerns in terms of the way we understand the Act, the intent of the Act was to, regulate scope of criminality, so serious crime, etc., etc. We say in our submission that is flawed because if you apply the criminality lens over it, there are at least 30 access points to the country that we've determined that aren't covered by maritime security cards. So we can't realistically sit here and say that that's very well thought out when, or unless we're led to believe that crime doesn't exist in those 30 access points around the country, where MIS doesn't apply. So again, we see that as fundamentally flawed, and we have to, I think we're concluding in terms of our opening statement that if that is the case, and we're seeking to enhance security and criminality checks for those workers on the waterfront that, in our view, are probably some of the most scrutinised workers in the world, we're creating an extra level for them, but we're ignoring where the legislation doesn't apply under maritime security in the first place, and there are still a gap of 30 entry points in this country where crimes could be committed and we'd be none the wiser.
These are ports.
Yes, berths, sorry.
Berths.
So berths within ports.
Can you give us, I was just under the impression that you had a port or a berth, you had to have an MSIC card.
No, that's not the case, and there are berths that the original intent of the Act again was a counter-terrorism piece of legislation, not a piece of legislation for criminality, and therefore it was, I believe, was there for the purpose of, strategic asset or, high-value asset, whatever the case may be.
Sorry, I've got to go on this. These berths, all right, so where are they?
All around country.
You could supply, you could tell the committee which ports we're talking about?
Not off the top of my head because I haven't
Well, you can take a look at
identified
those.
them here, but we could identify, and they're the ones that we've found in the last 7 days that we know of, and there's been no real analysis done by the ITF and or the MUA in terms of what that means and how susceptible those particular, let's call them access points, those particular access points would be, or what kind of criminality could occur, or those kinds of things. We're not sure of the vulnerability because we've only had a limited time to start analysing it.
this is not a rowboat coming onto a beach from someone who might be passing drugs on somewhere out to sea. This is actually ships which could be of quantities of tens of thousands of tonnes pulling up next to a berth that has no requirement for an MSIC,
Correct.
let alone foreign crews that may be not licensed.
Correct.
And you raised the point that there's a few hundred Australian seafarers doing coastal shipping, yet there's many thousands and hundreds of thousands of foreign seafarers doing the coastal shipping.
So, Senator Sheldon, you probably winded up my opening statements better than I could, and I was going to summarise in that example a ship trading on the Australian coast without a permit triggers that a ship owner or charterer may have a propensity to ignore Australian laws and regulations. The foreign crew have no MISC or background checks. The department doesn't even know that they are here, let alone what ports they're visiting. And if the department doesn't know that they are here, Border Force would not be able to appropriately allocate the resources to ensure illegal activity is not being conducted.
So I've got this right, if I can, Chair. So the MSIC doesn't apply to the foreign seafarers. So does that mean in these 30 berths, are they bulk? Is there wharfies? Is there...
Yeah, there'd be a range of workers as any other normal operation. So, you know, from the truck driver to the wharfie to the seafarers to possibly pilotage and mooring gangs and all of those things that come with any other operational port.
Well, that certainly opened up a whole new angle on it. I'm sorry, I don't understand the...
Senator Rice, do you have questions?
I do, yes.
All right, why don't you have a go?
Great, thanks, Chair, and thanks, Ian and Paul, Mr. Bray and Mr. McAleer. Yes, the evidence that you've just given, I think, really emphasises some of the concerns that we were expressing in the Senate last week about the difference between Australian seafarers and seafarers on foreign flagged ships. Can you just talk me through, in comparison to what you were just describing about the lack of security check on these foreign seafarers, what are the checks that are currently required to get an MSIC and the government is proposing will be required to get an MSIC if this legislation went through?
As I understand it, this legislation won't cover foreign seafarers, and the normal procedures that are current now is I think they just need to be cleared. The captain sends a crew list in, that's cleared by Border Force, and I don't believe that there's, as I understand it, any changes perceived by the introduction of this legislation that would change that.
For the Australian seafarers, what are the limits, and what are the security checks that they have to go through to get an MSIC?
Well, it's not just seafarers, it's maritime workers in general, and they're some of the most onerous application processes I've ever seen. It's extraordinarily difficult to not outline almost all aspects of your life. You have to provide addresses going back many years of where you've lived. You have to outline crimes which attract or could attract prison sentences, not even that you've been found guilty of, but that you've been charged with. And it is an incredibly onerous application process which, from our perspective, doesn't need to be expanded. It already captures people's involvement in serious crime. It stops numerous people from being employed on the waterfront because it captures previous crimes that they've committed. Even though in most instances, they've paid a significant penalty for that. So I cannot understand why it's necessary to expand on the application processes because it's already doing its job. Anyone who's found guilty of a serious crime cannot get onto the waterfront where it involves serious criminality and certainly any terrorism-related offences. Workers have their entire lives exposed, so I've been made aware of numerous instances where people have been denied employment based on the crime that they committed when they were 18. There was a number of examples where they were under 18 and they shouldn't have even had to outline the crime that they committed. So it is incredibly onerous already. It is a process that has prevented numerous people from getting a start on the waterfront. But for most, if not, it's only a very tiny percentage of people, it is not prevented them from working on the waterfront because we've been able to identify that they actually didn't breach any of the current legislation. Yeah, there has been examples where waterside workers have been engaged in criminality. There's numerous government agencies, there's numerous police and other associated departments that have investigated crime on the waterfront and in the community, and those workers have been, sacked from their employment and had their MSIC cards torn up. So there's no justification whatsoever to expand on already onerous and, at the end of the day, discriminatory application processes. We've already got one rule for some and another for others, and this is only going to expand the gaps between workers' rights in this country.
Yeah, and so yes, and so in comparison, the foreign seafarers, as you've just described, who are basically out in the community after a very cursory customs check, we know nothing about their background.
Nothing.
No.
And I just wanted to go to the risks of that as well, and particularly as, I've found out, and I know that, as Mr. Bray, you've just described, as some of these workers being some of the most exploited workers on the planet. One of the things that concerns me is that they're actually the type of workers that would be very vulnerable to being tempted into doing criminal activity because of the poor conditions that they are working under and the poor remuneration. If somebody came to them and suggested to them, well, do you want to get involved in some nefarious criminal activity, that they are exactly the type of worker that you think might be vulnerable to do that. Would you like to comment on that?
Yeah, there's probably two aspects to that, Senator. One is, the precarious position they find themselves in as exploited, some of the most exploited workers in the world, working largely in isolation, albeit with other seafarers, but it's still a life of isolation, working on a ship, on extremely low levels of wage. So they could be incentivised, through currency or transaction, but also too, they could be bullied or intimidated and forced into such action. So there's two ways to look at that, and equally both are just as valid as one another in terms of how that could be played out.
Yeah, I don't want to be prejudicial against foreign seafarers in the slightest, but I could just see that because of the circumstances that they are employed under, that they are very vulnerable to that intimidation, if not doing something voluntarily.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Rice. Senator Sterle, do you have any additional questions?
We've still got some more. Thanks,
Senator
Chair.
Sheldon?
Good. Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. Bray, in the government's submission to this inquiry, they've said that the Australian seafarers are not required to hold an MSIC unless they need unsupervised access to a maritime security zone. They go on to say that, and I quote, some maritime employers may require all their employees to hold MSICs. However, this is not a government requirement. In your experience, can an Australian get a job as a seafarer without an MSIC? And do all employers or almost all employers need an MSIC?
Well, technically they can get a job, but if they want to follow the industry with any concise, determination of employment security, it's in their best interest that they do have one. I couldn't think of too many, or I couldn't think of a single person that has embarked on a career as a seafarer in this country that would have got through that career without obtaining and holding a valid MIS card.
So that's the point is, if they want unsupervised access to a maritime security zone, they have to get an MSIC, otherwise they have to be escorted.
Correct.
And that would cause some difficulty in an operation to operate correctly.
Yeah, it would, because of the heightened casualisation of the industry, particularly around offshore oil and gas and those kinds of things. Seafarers could, be working, in one sector, say the dredging sector of the maritime industry for a period of 6 months, and then might find themselves in the offshore. So the sheer, by sheer virtue of, needing to travel for work and needing to, enter into different sectors of the maritime industry, they couldn't do it without not obtaining a maritime security card if indeed they wanted to continue their employment.
Is it correct that, as far as you're aware, that the majority of, and potentially all employers in coastal shipping require someone to have an MSIC?
Correct.
So effectively, M6 are required to have for all seafarers.
Yes.
I want to, sorry, Senator Sheldon, but I want to come back to the MSIC. And look, you guys in your previous life, and I know I've heard many occasions when, and I know when we set up the MSIC card and the ASIC card was set up because it was this committee that worked closely with the ITF at the time, with Mr Summers and Miss White from the TWU, and with employers, all saying, yes, security, we get all that. But we've heard so many, this committee has heard so many times that it's supposed to take about 45 days to get your MSIC. Is that correct, to the best of your knowledge? Get your renewal? Your renewal.
It's supposed to.
It's supposed
Yeah, it's supposed to. But we've also heard of evidence of 90 days. Guys, from your previous lives, are we off the mark there, or is that just a one-off and nothing to worry about?
No.
It's not a one-off. It's not all of them either that go beyond those time frames. But when you're dealing with these instances quite regularly, it is very difficult to speak to a continuous stream of members who haven't got their MSIC cards, which denies them their ability to actually work.
So their employment would cease straight away with the expiry date?
That's right.
And you've got examples of that around the nation?
Multiple examples.
And they're just tough? There's no recompense? There's no, we'll pay you while you stood down? It's off the job?
Yeah.
Gee whiz. So what about the new bill, which the bill is proposing, that, and I'm keen on the current employees, because what we're led to believe, and the departments can clear us up here, that if their clearance is knocked back, they don't have to give a reason. Now, if you guys, you'd be having conversations with you in your previous roles with your members along this. Have you got any thoughts around that? I mean,
well, it's not just previous discussions in previous roles. It continues to happen now. As we've already mentioned, wharfies are probably the most scrutinised workers in this country. You go to work surrounded by razor wire. There are CCTV cameras everywhere. The only places that they aren't is in the toilets, but they're outside of the toilets. You need a card and an access card and a key to operate all machinery, to get inside all doors, to go into all operational areas. There's allocation sheets which describe where each individual has worked throughout the entirety of their shift. It's impossible to hide anywhere. As much as I'd hate to admit that, it used to be a great feature of life on the waterfront, always the ability to hide somewhere and not have to, be out there working your guts out. But
Senators never do that.
only a former wharfie could.
There's nowhere to hide on the waterfront now. And workers already feel incredible pressure when they go to work. You've got cameras on you everywhere. Your employer is watching you. We've had employees identified for text messaging whilst they've been in their machinery. So the level of scrutiny is impossible to overcome. They're already feeling that intense scrutiny before they go to work, whilst they get into work and during their shift as well. And they operate in a very difficult and dangerous environment. And to have this security on you 8 hours or 12 hours a day is intense, and I think it's quite dangerous. But to then expand upon that and suggest that there should not be any accountability or transparency for decisions made about someone's employment, I think is incredibly extreme. And we've seen examples of that in the past in dictatorships, but not in many democracies have we seen an ability for someone to lose their job based on unsubstantiated criminal intelligence or guilt by association. The closest example I've seen is in the Waterfront Commission in New York and New Jersey, where I spoke to a number of longshoremen, they call them in the United States, who had been caught up by the Waterfront Commission and lost their jobs because of DUIs. Others who lost their jobs because their neighbours were involved in criminal activity. Others who lost their jobs because their cousins, aunts, uncles, or whoever was involved in sometimes very minor criminal activity. But the scope of this legislation is so broad that it picks up all of these people, including people who have committed crimes. And, we're not all free from sin here. But they've paid their time. They've worked on the waterfront for many years. They're law-abiding citizens. They've now got families who rely on their jobs and rely on their income, and are now being brought into the scope of this legislation for no justifiable reason whatsoever. If there weren't any laws already in existence that prevented people from dealing drugs or from, throwing bombs, then I could understand it. But there's plenty of laws in this country already which demonstrates to anybody who has any functional brain activity whatsoever that you're not allowed to do those things.
I think, Mr McAleer, the bit that concerns me the greatest, and the departments will have the opportunity to explain this to us later, and I'd said in the Senate the other day, and we're all for, we need to squash the organised crimes, and we need to get rid of the drugs that are coming in and out of our nation. They're not coming by carrier pigeon, for crying out loud, okay? They're not coming on Australian ships, we know that for a fact. They're not Australian seafarers. They're not coming in by hot air balloon. So I am absolutely baffled how we think we can make it as hard as possible for existing employees and Aussies wanting to come on the waterfront, but yet there is this gaping hole. Am I the only one who sees this? This gaping hole. We find drugs floating off of your coastline up there, Senator McDonald, last week. I don't think they pack up. I don't think it's talcum powder or corn flour that's been wrapped up and thrown overboard 10-kilo packages. What's the thought of the waterside workers and the seafarers who are actually Australians who are relying on this industry for their income to be thinking like
it's very difficult. I mean, I've witnessed wharfies go to work, be lined up against the wall, have sniffer dogs, jump on their backs, whilst the media was there. I think this is an ideological decision. I don't think it's based in any criminal justification whatsoever. We're all aware that Australia is an island nation, and that in order for drugs and other prohibited content or cargo, it needs to come in, often by boat or aeroplane, but they're not all cargo vessels, they're not all merchant vessels, and as you've indicated, plenty of examples of them coming in on yachts and charter boats and other recreational and leisure boats. It comes in. I mean, are we going to have security guards and federal police on every beach with binoculars, stopping every jet ski and boat that comes past and check them to see whether or not they're rightfully able to be on a beach? Absolutely not. There's laws in this country, and as I said, if you go and visit some of our terminals and some of our ports, you would find it incredibly difficult to even get in if you're a worker, but incredibly easy to get in if you're a contractor. Incredibly easy to get in the back of a truck. There's so many gaping holes.
Sorry, Mr. Becker. Tell us more about that. Easier to get in if you're a contractor.
Well, I've never understood why there is so much scrutiny on understanding a wharfie's personal life and past when there's so many gaping holes in the security processes at the moment. If you're a senior manager or a middle manager, you don't have to get an MSIC card. Really? I mean, these are the people that are making operational decisions during the entirety of the shift, are aware where people are in control of security, are in control of the cameras, and they're not a part of this. It's only people who are going out into operational areas. You're not allowed out of your vehicles in most instances, so you're locked up in a cabin, either driving around with cameras all over you, or in a machine which you've got no access to the containers anyway. Very few people have any access whatsoever to the containers.
Well, let's talk about that, Mr. McAleer, because in your submission, and Mr. Bray, let's go here too, that wasn't your predecessor actually mentioned the packing and unpacking of containers, not done by wharfies.
No, it's done 30 kilometres up the road.
So for the purposes of this inquiry, you should tell everyone listening how it actually happens out there. If all you guys do is take the container off, your members take the container off the truck and then they put it onto the ship. So correct. There is gaping holes there because are all containers scanned as they go through Port Botany or Fremantle?
No,
only an incredibly small percentage of boxes are actually scanned. So think about that for one. So there's this preponderance of views that it's all coming into the country in containers. Why isn't every container checked? It's not. And then you have, in many instances, contractors come on who haven't got an MC card, who might be escorted by someone else without an MC card.
Without an MC?
Well, potentially. If a manager or middle manager doesn't have an MC card and they're the only ones available to escort somebody, that could happen.
So, Mr McAleer and Mr Bray, let's be very clear. You've seen this happen because part of the government's defence in the Senate last week is that no one can access those security areas unless they're accompanied by someone with an MC.
That's like saying no one will drive through a red light because there's laws saying that no one's allowed to drive through a red light.
Well, that makes it pretty clear to me, because I think, in all honesty, with the decent officials who think they're being told the truth, it couldn't be further from the truth.
Now, I just want to draw us into this point. You say that it's almost impossible for anyone to hide on the waterfront. You've made the point that people are contained within workspaces, working on the cranes or working other workspaces that are contained in those areas. But for foreign crew, they can just get off a ship and not have their bag inspected. And it doesn't sound wrong to you?
Well, it sounds wrong. All I can see in the proposed bill that's we're here discussing today is you're removing the right to the presumption of innocence, and then not even bothering as a common courtesy to tell the person they've lost their right to innocence because of some crystal ball gazing.
And this
Not
point,
even crystal ball gazing. I mean, this is where potentially someone has given information that is inaccurate, untrue, untested for their own personal...
So it could be gossip.
Absolutely.
Or
And it's that
vengeance.
sort of criminal intelligence gathering, and you don't have to be involved in, the crime commission to understand that not all witnesses provide accurate testimony or evidence or material. And there is no accountability in this legislation. There is no access to natural justice for these workers who have been caught up in this, and it could be, by default, someone who doesn't like them, someone who doesn't like their, trade unionism or political views or religious views or anything like that. People could be individually targeted and discriminated against for a whole host of reasons, have information said about them that is untrue, inaccurate and untested, and have their livelihoods destroyed because of it.
Okay, sorry, Senator Sheldon, I jumped in again.
that's fine.
And the irony and hypocrisy is that Australian workers are exposed to this, and other Australian workers aren't, and foreign workers aren't either. But our defence here is not to subject others to these same onerous features, and certainly not the foreign seafarer who there's legislation that prevents seafarers from being at sea for longer than 15 months. There is legislation that prevents seafarers from being involved in wage theft, wage slavery and other terrible crimes
Only if
committed.
you chase it, no one else is going to do it.
Yeah, and we've exposed that on numerous occasions. We continue to expose it on a weekly, if not daily basis, and yet none of that is focused on. None of that is scrutinised to the extent that a wharfie trying to go to work at 10 p.m. at night is exposed to.
I think the gaping holes here, Chair, and I'm mindful of the time, but the gaping holes I see here is the screws are being applied to the thumbnails of certain parts of Australia's workforce. We've got 30 berths here that we've been told by the ITF that don't have, there is no MSIC, and we'll get the departments to clarify that or tell us otherwise. So there's gaping holes in our security there. We don't know who loads and unloads the majority of the boxes. I mean, they go off to the big trucking yards, and we understand that. But, then they're distributed all over the nation. How do I know that? Because, crikey, that was 16 years of my life running around chasing them. So while we've got all these gaping holes, it just, to me, beggars belief that we should target one group of Australian workers and just keep applying that pressure. On the last couple of minutes that you got, sorry guys, before the chair shuts me up, is there anything else we need to hear?
Well, I think you've summed it up, except for to the extent of, I don't think you've expanded the whole realm of it, and that is, it doesn't do one thing to, bring in any transparency or accountability to the arrivals of foreign vessels trading on the coast in terms of the temporary licence. It doesn't vet those crews that are on those ships that we don't know are here trading what cargoes. It does nothing to tie up those security issues or security measures, and that's where we're most vulnerable. Again, and when you couple that with, you know, the basis of, you know, intelligence agencies being allowed to apply criminal intelligence that a worker may commit an offence,
Yeah, may.
and you lose that presumption of innocence, I think that wraps it up.
Thanks, Mr. Bray. Can I just say that you are going to provide, hopefully by the close of business today, the names of those berths or entry points and any other ships that are operating with the TPV that come across your desk?
We'll attempt to.
I know, sorry.
I think I said we would supply the names of the 2 ships over the last 2 days, but
Yeah.
if you want more, just clarify.
No, well,
and
let's
I'll
go
see
the
if we
last
can-
2 days, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
If we can find out where they've been, carting what. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Sterle. Please go with our thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. You've been called a few things over the years, but gentlemen's probably not one of them, is it?
Never.
Speak,
He knows me all-
speak
me all
for
the time.
yourself.